So Patty, today talking to James Huber about dual pricing, cash discounting, surcharging. I don't know about you, but I thought it was so kind of liberating to not have to say, I'm not an attorney, this is not legal advice, and instead to actually have an attorney that provided legal advice.
That's what I was going to say. You know, after weeks of James and I saying we're not attorneys, we're not offering legal advice, we actually brought an attorney to you who's not necessarily offering you advice, but certainly providing a basis of understanding.
Yeah, exactly. Some legal insights for sure, right?
Yes.
So we have James Huber talking about a lot of different things, but visa compliance and visa rules and a lot of different things that are just not dry in any way, honestly. I thought it was actually very engaging.
Very engaging.
Then questions from the field. Today I'll talk about selling through the summer and kind of the, what do you do? Do you take the summer off? Do you take a few vacations? Do you focus? And so I talk about kind of my version, which is of course going to be different than yours. Yours is different than mine, but I talk about my version of how I grow my business through the summer while also spending a lot of quality time with my family. And then Patty, I thought yours was very intriguing. So tell us about
use of biometric payments. We've heard a lot over the years, about biometric payments, and you see it sort of in the wholesale applications, but there's some rumblings, some pilots going on that suggest that we could be seeing this at some point in the future.
Awesome. Well, this podcast is brought to you by Valor Paytech, ccsalespro.com/VALOR, processor agnostic terminal gateway omnichannel solution. Check it out. And Patty, if you're ready, I am. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey everybody, Patty and I are here today with my friend James Huber, who is an attorney at Global Legal Law Firm. How are you doing today, James?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I told Patty last week, I said, I'm really tired of saying I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. I feel like I've said that about 1,000 times.
So we're going to get one on here.
I said, so today we have an attorney and he's going to provide legal advice. So it's nice to be able to say it the other way around there. So James, I know you've been on here several times. So rather than diving into backstory and all that, we want to talk about visa rules, our industry, and especially this issue of the non-compliant surcharging and all of that. Just give us a little flavor. I'm kind of curious from your perspective, how big of a deal is this? I mean, are you having a lot of clients talking about it and kind of this ongoing push that Visa has had against, non-cash adjustment programs and all that? So just give us a little bit of your insight of just kind of big picture. How big of a deal is this and kind of what's been your experience so far with this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I saw your articles and that, when you say something's a big deal, I tend to believe you. But as far as what's happened since, I haven't heard a lot of chatter. When you and I discuss, I'm going, when something like this, usually our clients are reaching out and contacting us, but I think a lot of them didn't really have a strong reaction to it. I personally like it when Visa speaks up, when we have greater structure. It's nice to know where the line is. I mean, I've been advising people on cash discounting for over 10 years, and they're, what do I do exactly? How do I do it? And for the longest time, we've been going, here's the line. It's about this big. You can get close to it. You can even get into it. Just try not to go all the way over it. So, I personally like having a set level of rules and we know where the line is. Right. Mm-hmm. With this, though, it looks like they want to kill what's out there and working. And we've seen really help businesses, particularly over the last 2 years. So while I'm all for regulation, not at the expense, particularly of small businesses.
Yeah. I like it. And I think to kind of concur with what you're hearing, it was like when the Visa memo first came out, I was getting all these calls and all these, hey, what's happening, all this. And I think too, it's interesting to note that the memo specifically was asking for contact information. It was asking for data on people that are doing this. And then Visa was saying they were going to kind of deploy their army of mystery shoppers to like look and see what's happening. So I was kind of thinking it'd be 60 to 90 days before we started, actually seeing a kind of an increase in notices and things of that nature, but it will be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. So, all right. So, but here's what I want to do. So I have a kind of a line of logic, and I'm actually really excited to have this conversation with you. I know we talked the other day, but I really am excited because I have a line of logic and I'm excited to have an attorney's perspective on this. Okay. So I want to start with the ISO here and the relationship that ISOs have with the card brands. obviously this is a contractual relationship, and I think a lot of times in our industry people forget this, but there is a contract that exists that was signed. So talk about that a little bit. What is kind of the scope of, I mean, every ISO is signing an agreement that in some way references Visa rules, and what is their responsibility and requirement to follow Visa rules? Talk a little about that relationship.
Yeah, I appreciate that, particularly bringing it to people's attention. As far as people who have read the Visa rules, it's certainly not everybody in the industry. It's not an easy read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've read them many, many, many times, and we have a office full of attorneys here, and they'll come up and they'll be saying, this is in the rules, and I'm going, well, you're talking about what applies in Australia. So it's not an easy document, but yeah, everybody's on the hook for these rules. Everybody, I mean, there's a different set of rules, but everybody with a card in their wallet is on the hook for a bunch of these rules. But as it relates to the ISO, you're responsible for these. Even I'm a retail ISO, I don't have any risk or anything like that. Read your contract a little closer. If you're violating those rules and something goes on, you're going to get popped. Potentially. And it's rare unless you're out there doing things egregiously, or you have a partner that, doesn't value their agents as much as some other people, but other entities. But no, you're on the hook for the rules. You're on the hook for how you're selling. And in cash discounting, yeah, you're on the hook for making sure that merchant has the proper signs, the proper disclosures, their machines working properly. And in a lot of cases, we'll see ISO agreements where they're saying you need to make sure the merchant is trained on card acceptance. And, we'll edit that in ISO agreements, but I look at that as every time they hire a new person, you ISO better go down there and make sure that person knows how to properly accept a card, because that's what your agreement says. And you brush over that. Yeah, I'll make sure the merchant's reasonably changed. But, the processors or the bigger ISOs, sometimes they're looking for ways to pop their agents. And if they get a fine from Visa, they don't want to pay that fine. They're going to come to you. So if one of these secret shoppers goes and hits your merchant and they get a fine, guess who's going to get a offset or a ACH deduction?
Yep.
And potentially, I would imagine, even lose the client, right?
Potentially lose the client. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, I don't see the fines. I'd be interested in what you guys think. I don't know if the merchants will get the fines necessarily. I think it'll be
they certainly could, right? It's like Visa has the authority to do it. Do they want the PR? Do they want the negative PR of going after the small business owners? I know of only a very, very small handful. I know 2 or 3 cases where, and in those cases, it was the merchant got notified that they had 30 days, and they got notified they had 60, then they got notified they had 90, and they just refused to do something that was egregiously non-compliant, and they got a fine. I actually know more of them with the state side, state AG's office, that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Right.
But I'm not familiar. I don't know about you. Yeah. I'm not familiar with too many.
Yeah. No, I mean, big merchants or merchants that are, like you said, doing something really, really wrong. But you're right. They'll get a couple warnings and then, ignore it. And then there comes a fine. But I see it here, particularly where if you've complied with the memo and you've given them the roadmap of what leads down to this. And also as a secret shopper, Visa certainly is going to know where all that the transaction fed through. So
right.
I see it being top down, but if they put a fine on Fiserv, they're not going to write that check. They're going to go to, feed it right down the stream until it gets to the agent.
Yeah. Can we dive just a little bit more in terms of the contractual relationship between the merchant and the card brands? Now, I know we talk a lot about the Supreme Court ruling several years ago about free speech rights and, the right to display your prices the way you want to. But how does that fit in? How does the merchant process of communicating prices fit in with their contractual obligation to Visa, MasterCard?
Yeah, the merchant agreement has, you're on the hook for the Visa rules. It's in the terms and conditions that you never get, that hopefully are on a
Right.
website, but that's all compliant. Anytime we agree to something, you click to agree, you're in, no matter what's in that agreement, unless there's cases, I won't get too sidetracked here. We have a merchant who was at their bank, they get the agreement, it references the program guide. There's no link to it. It doesn't even exist online actually here. And there we're saying, no, he didn't get the program guide. But they're saying, well, should have gone and found it. Or found it where?
Yeah.
And it
right.
references 2 versions of the program guide. But anyways,
Right.
I divest here.
Well, it's not a digression either, James, because I was, watching the hearing, I guess it was last week or the week before now, 2 weeks ago, and Durbin's, the Durbin hearing. And that was something that he brought up and a lot of the merchants brought up, is the idea that there are these obligations that the merchants have, but they have no way of really accessing what their obligations are. I mean, that's kind of a tough nut, right?
Absolutely. And think about when, I'm on the hook for the card brands at any date and time. They're not all available online. The most recent one's available online, but if you're banging around, you don't know which ones you're looking at. There's the Visa acceptance rules, there's the Visa issuing rules, there's the acquirer, you don't know what you're on the hook there for. And particularly here, James and I got into this the other day of small businesses, the merchants that will actually be hurt by this, that are benefiting the most. I don't think you want to mess with those guys right now. Those are the lifeblood. That's, bipartisan. It should be a bipartisan issue with these small businesses.
Right.
I wouldn't start messing with these businesses right now, because look, in a lot of ways, they're the consumer. It's just a person. They didn't go to business school. They own a franchise or something, or they're running a small business. They're not that sophisticated. And the law says if you're a business, you're imputed a higher level of sophistication. You don't have all the consumer protection laws. That's changed in a lot of states where I'm at, where I'm in California. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that these conversations are happening, because don't mess with these guys right now. There's legislation trying to be pushed of saying, hey, no more arbitration agreements because it's too expensive to arbitrate. And, the whole path of the benefits of arbitration has gone violently off course, because if I have an arbitration clause, I can't afford it. So yeah, I think that putting this on these businesses and fining them, saying, hey, you agreed to the card brand rules, you should have known.
Yeah.
If I'm the merchant, I'm 100% going to look at the agent and go, what? You told me I would save money and I could keep my business open because of these margins, and now I'm getting fined. I'm done. Because a fine like this, if you put a $25,000, $55,000 fine on certain restaurants, they're done.
Yeah. So I think two things I want to clarify from this part. The number one point here, and kind of in this line of logic, is I think all three of us agree that Visa, unless extenuating circumstances, Visa really doesn't have a big interest in going after individual merchants, small merchants, and fining them. I mean, that would be a course of last resort, or at least historically. I don't know, James, you may have additional thoughts, but it seems to me that that's been the trend, that's kind of their path of that's their last resort. They don't want to do that. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So then
I think that they're afraid of the blowback,
the backlash.
Yeah.
Right. So that's that's one piece of it. So then as we talk about free speech, I think the other kind of questionable thing here is, for instance, the Durbin Amendment. I'm sure very familiar with this document, James, is, where what are your thoughts on this? Where it talks about, specifically says the card brands cannot inhibit a person through contract or whatever, from doing one of these cash discount in-kind incentive type programs. Now, again, there's been a lot of debate about, does the non-cash adjustment program fall within that? Because you're adding something, you're not truly discounting. So any kind of further thoughts along those lines of this free speech? Because it's like, technically the merchant is not allowed to do this based on the document that they signed in the Visa rules. They're not allowed to add a fee to debit. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. They aren't even really allowed to add it to credit if they haven't registered with the card brands that they're surcharging. But what are your thoughts on that as far as the free speech versus the contract? Does that merchant have any kind of legal ground to stand on there to say, well, we're doing this because we believe we believe that this is a violation of our constitutional free speech rights? Or like, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of people, when they took this issue and made it a free speech right, I think a lot of people were, wow, yes, not fully understanding the implications of I have the constitutional rights in your business, what you're obliged, what you agree to in a contract.
Right.
So I 100% agree with the free speech rights versus what you can agree to in a contract. You can't make a contract against the law. I can't, hire somebody to kill both of you. Maybe one of you, just kidding. So
right.
We see, the card brands until very recently have operated a lot like the DMV. This is a privilege, not a right.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this with match listing and how putting somebody on the match list is, in my opinion, a violation of their due process rights. You put me on this list without any hearing, you took away my right to operate
Engage in
my
commerce.
business.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so in that, we've seen a switch in how judges are looking at this because of, I think because of COVID came along and they're suddenly going, this big wad of cash is useless from my living room. So I see that here shaping the landscape. The card brands are a very large organization. And this argument of, the corporations are so big, they're having too big of an effect, had a really prominent proponent a few years ago when Trump got banned from Twitter. This argument had a very prominent proponent. Donald Trump said, hey, Twitter, you can't ban me because you have too big of an influence. I have free speech rights. These big corporations shouldn't have this much of a say. Only I should know. So Visa and the card brands, they're in a similar spot here. They are very big. They affect almost everybody's life on a day-to-day basis. And they've made using them expensive. Cut a lot of, doesn't really apply now, but a lot of merchants held out until about, 10, 15, like 20 years ago.
20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I've dated myself now. So merchants were,
Can't date
merchants
yourself.
were
Who can you date?
So merchants were holding out saying this is too expensive.
Right.
And when cash discounting came along first, everyone's going, no, my customers aren't going to want to pay that. And so it gained all the steam. We've all kind of accepted. We all understand that it costs money and they charge these fees, and you go to a business, you usually appreciate the business, so you pay the fees, but they've made it so expensive. And then they're just saying, this is the way it is. But they've created the situation themselves and they're not allowing a way to work around it. So when you've got the small businesses literally keeping the rails on track here, and we're seeing things quickly deteriorating, we better put them in check here. I'm glad that they're checking it out and doing some recon, but I think they better watch their step here. When they talked about raising interchange a couple of years ago, I think Durbin furrowed his brow and they said, never mind. I think they're going to get the same backlash here if they push this, because when they start penalizing the processors and it's pushed down and it even gets near the merchant and you tell a merchant they can't do this, if you tell some merchants they can't do this right now, they're done.
Yeah.
That margin. I mean, what's most restaurants' margin? It's like
And-
3 or 4%.
yeah.
So there you go.
So James, I attended the hearing, the Durbin hearing a couple weeks ago. There was a lot of talk about, small businesses being the engine of our recovery, that the card brands and the issuers are really socking it to these small merchants. I have my own thoughts about this, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are about in terms of the role of regulators and legislators. Are they going to be the ones refereeing this debate? Are they going to be legislating, regulating rates? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it will. A lot of regulation in this industry comes through enforcement.
Right.
But here I think it's going to come from the legislature because we're really talking about consumer protection issues.
Mhm.
We're talking about small businesses being affected here.
Right.
And humongous corporations too. So
Right. You got the big businesses versus the small businesses. That was something that came out in the hearing. This is not a business versus consumer issue.
No, it's not. It's everybody's affected. And what we're seeing, at least what I'm seeing, and in my experience, I don't care. I don't care about paying that fee. That doesn't affect me.
Right.
It affects the business. Now, when we first saw cash discounting come up, I remember saying this to clients, be careful, little coffee shop, because when so-and-so guy comes in and he's paying $3.50 for his $3 coffee, he's going to put up a bad Yelp review and you're done. I'm not seeing that. I don't hear about that anymore. So we're not protecting the consumers here. No one's worried about the consumers. Spending's still up.
Right. And
if
consumers want to
they-
help businesses. They especially want to help small businesses.
They want to help small businesses. They love their, it's the small dollar transactions. They love their little businesses. Where I see people getting angry is they're at the hotel, but you're on vacation and you're mad at everything already. So,
Right, exactly. So I'm sorry to jump in. So what I want to do here is we have a few minutes left. I really want to transition because this, I think, is so important in this conversation, and hopefully our listeners maybe even play this one back over a couple times because we really need to understand everything we just talked about. That's the context. Now, I want to talk about the practicality here. So now we have this program that, Visa has pretty clearly said they are against and that they are now looking to take some type of action to limit or eliminate. And so what I've been thinking a lot about, James, even since our last call, is just kind of the scope of compliance. And what strikes me as interesting is, I'll give you an example. One specific ISO, smallish ISO, maybe a couple hundred deals a month, that's already gotten some really serious fines from their acquirer over their program. They've been able to fight them off. But in their situation, a lot of it stems from their marketing and their advertising, and that they are saying, we eliminate your processing fees. We have a non-cash adjustment. We apply it to credit and debit. And what's interesting to me is that I think the ISOs, and I mean, I'm as much to blame for this as anybody, that we've kind of embraced this idea that we're responsible for everything the merchant says and does as it relates to accepting payments. And I kind of wonder if that was a mistake, right? Like, wait a second, hold on a minute. Like, how are we responsible for this again? So what's interesting to me is now we have all these processor agnostic technology solutions, and they have a feature. You can add a fee. Like the merchant can do it, So the ISO's coming in and saying, okay, we'll enable this feature for you, right? And then a Visa mystery shopper comes in and says, well, this is not compliant. And all of a sudden this complaint goes to the acquirer, and as you mentioned, kind of flows down the hill to the ISO. Wait a minute. Why is this our problem? The merchant's not listing it on the shelf, or, we did a dual pricing at the terminal that's totally compliant with Visa rules, but then the merchant chose to only list the cash price on the shelf for the menu. So what I'm curious is your opinion on that. And I've been kind of moving in that direction of telling my clients, like, you know, maybe we don't want to be responsible for like everything that happens within the context of the merchant's building or website. Like maybe we're only responsible for what happens when you accept a payment, because that's what we do. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that kind of approach and general idea?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. And so who's going to hold you responsible for the merchant activity? It's probably not going to be the merchant. It's probably going to be your processor or your bank. So that's where we sometimes, you know, people are looking at me going, it's not a big deal for your agreement. It's a humongous deal. Or I'll get an agreement and I might say, hey, don't work with this person if they're not going to move here. Look, I hate killing deals, but this comes up. If you've got a merchant who's not going to follow your rules, I agree. Why should I be on the hook for this? I made an introduction to these two. I'm responsible for what this person does. You know, it gets down to the rules of agency and who's on the hook for what. I can only control what I can control. And yeah, I shouldn't be on the hook if you're going rogue. You know, hey, I sold you this machine. I didn't even sell you this machine. I signed it up. It got shipped from over here. If that machine blows up in somebody's face, am I on the hook for that? No, probably not. I hope not. Why should I be on the hook if you're not following these rules between me and the merchant? Now, there are all sorts of things, you know, we try and do. Let's say you have a merchant selling CBD. I'll make a nice little rider that says, hey, you go outside of these lines, you agree I have nothing to do with this. You hold me harmless and everything like that. So I'll usually recommend something like that. A lot of the processors say, hey, no side agreements between you and the merchant. Okay, fine, but this has nothing to do with, you know, the fees. I'm not charging you an extra rate or getting any kind of weird kickback or anything. No, I've got a thing that says, hey, I'm not responsible if you go and run this debit card, you know, discounting program way outside the line. So yeah, I like a little rider like that. Nobody likes having more paperwork, but you know, just like the small businesses running a thin margin, we're all running our margins too. And having a lawsuit or a big fine against a merchant is not something I should have to deal with. And look, you might have to deal with it, but it's also nice to go, hey, I'm on your team. You've indemnified me. You can't come after me. I will help you though, instead of them going, who can I knock down and blame this on? Look, you're not going to be able to blame it on me. I'm your advocate. I've always been your advocate. It takes the conflict out of it, actually.
Yeah. I love the. Go ahead, Pat.
I just have a question for both of you guys. Maybe one or both of you can answer me on this. Why is Visa always the head? Why do these things always come out? You know, these sort of compliance things always come out of Visa and not out of MasterCard.
Go ahead. You got an answer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually, you know, MasterCard runs the match list, and you know, I'm battling with them.
Yeah, but they don't come out with memos that say you can't be doing this.
They don't come out with memos, but they are the ones pushing fines a lot. As far as the memos, I think Visa's the big way. Visa's the biggest player, and they're the ones connected, you know, getting looked at the most. You know, MasterCard's still the underdog. You know, you got a MasterCard, you're kind of like, you know, the up and comer, you know, the scrappy one. You got a Visa.
But most people have both. Let's be realistic, and they throw an Amex and a Discover in there just for, you know, ahas. No, I was just curious about that. That's all.
No, I agree. When I'm training attorneys, or you know, when I'm in litigation, I don't pull out the MasterCard rules. I pull out the Visa rules.
Right.
You know, these are the rules. The FTC, they talk about the Visa rules.
Right.
And I think it's because they're bigger.
Leader.
Bigger.
Yeah, they want the leadership position, and they got it. And now they got all the negatives to go with it. Right. So. Okay, last question real quick.
They're also the one rowing the boat. They're controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
So they have good and bad with that, holding that position. So James, my last question for you, and it's so interesting because you skipped over one I was going to talk about specifically was the rider, but I want to talk about that for just a second and dig in and make sure our audience kind of understands what we're talking about. So let me describe a scenario, and this is what the large acquirers are doing that I have seen that are doing these types of programs where they are in one way or another passing the cost of processing on to the consumer. We have, first of all, we have equipment that's doing something that Visa would consider compliant, which, my personal recommendation as someone who's not an attorney has been dual pricing, and I'm coming out with a whole kind of document about that. But this idea where you have a cash price and a card price, you're not adding a line item to the receipt on debit or credit for that matter. And so you have this device, and this device is doing something that I believe the card brands currently consider compliant. So then in addition to that, you talk about this rider, which is the idea of having this extra, maybe 2-page document that's in addition to the normal merchant agreement that basically says to the merchant, look, we are providing you with technology that we consider compliant with Visa rules, and we're on the hook for that. However, there are a myriad of different state laws and federal laws that guide things like disclosure and pricing disclosure and signage and all of that. And so we've given you some signage with recommended language, but ultimately you are responsible for making sure that you are in compliance with all these other rules as it comes to pricing. We're responsible for making sure the technology we provide is in compliance with Visa rules. Having the merchant sign that now pushes all of that kind of scope of compliance to the merchant in these situations. And as we talked about earlier, Visa doesn't seem to really have an appetite for going directly after the merchant. So what are your thoughts on that approach in general, or maybe I know you've seen that approach many times. Is there anything in addition you think that we should be doing as an industry, or kind of thoughts you have about that approach?
Yeah, I agree with that approach. I mean, I could fill up, every transaction and interaction with everybody and disclaim everything, or I could just never sell anything to anybody anytime and have no liability whatsoever. But There are little things you can put in place to protect yourself. And I think having a little rider to the merchant, but use it as a sales tool. Use it as an education guide for your merchant. Put some information that's actually valuable on there. The ones that I've seen be the most effective. I mean, look, one for cash discounting would be great, but it's been kind of straightforward until recently. But if you're doing the side by side, yes, give them a little guide that says, hey, this is how the program works. You agree that you're working it this way. You also agree that there's a whole bunch of stuff outside of us going on. I'll use CBD as an example. That's regulated down to the municipality. Mm-hmm. So I can give you the federal laws. I can try and give you the state laws. I can, at one single point in time, give you all the county laws. I cannot even try to get every single municipality's law on how CBD should be sold. So, you can give a disclaimer that says, hey, here's everything we know at this point in time. We're going to have a resource guide updated, with all of the information, but you've got to keep your head on a swivel too. You're in this state, here's what's going on. So go ahead, Patty.
No, I just think it's interesting because I think it's a real delicate, it would seem to me there has to be a delicate balancing act. Okay. You're going in, you're saying to the merchant, okay, I can save you a whole lot of money. And they sign up, and then you say, and by the way, you got to follow all these rules. I think that there are some merchants that could be turned off by that.
Well, I'll tell you, what's interesting, James, I sold a merchant a few days ago on dual pricing as I was kind of out, playing around with it and stuff. And when I pulled out that the processor I sold it for had one of these riders, and when I pulled it out, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if a customer came up to the counter and there was an item that was $100 and you saw that they pulled up in a real nice car, so you decided to charge them $200 and keep the extra $100 for yourself. Now that's illegal. Do you agree? And they're like, yes. Okay. Is it my fault that you did that? No. Right, because I'm not responsible for everything that you do with this device I'm giving you. There are laws that are outside the scope of payment processing, like don't steal, So in that same way, that's what this rider is. This is explaining that there are things outside of payment processing that you can do with payment processing that are illegal or that are not compliant. And there are state laws and municipal laws and federal laws and all these things. We're going to do our best. But at the end of the day, just like, any other crime or illegal activity, you're ultimately responsible for making sure that within your business, you're following the relevant laws. And
It's a relevant law.
he was like,
but
sure,
what
he
about
signed
the
it.
Visa
I don't know.
rules? But what about the visa rules, James? I mean, following the relevant laws, true, but what about following the relevant visa rules? That's where I get a little
Sure.
bit squishy.
Sure.
squishy
Well,
on
well,
it.
again, it's, to me, it's all part of that. And I don't know, James, you may have a different opinion, but to me, it's like, what you do on your shelf or your menu. I mean, if you look at Visa rules, do I need to be the expert about how Visa thinks about every single type of business and every possible scenario in terms of pricing disclosure? I mean, that's not realistic, especially for most salespeople, that's not even possible at all. So at some point we have to draw the line and say, we can make sure we're providing you with a compliant solution. As far as how you implement it, I mean, that's your business,
Yeah, and I mean it's coming into a landscape where I'm plunking you down in the middle of like I'm putting you in. Most people know how football works, but you plunk me down in a football field and you go, all right, go for it. Well, wait, you can't have that many people on your team. Wait, you have to wait for the whistle. Wait, what? No, I didn't know the rules. Right. So you can't put somebody in the landscape and just go, you need to know everything.
Sure.
And yeah, James, it's not your responsibility to teach them all about it, but you can't make it overly complicated to be in this, landscape.
That's
It's
my
like
point, yeah.
handing somebody an AK-47, which unfortunately, in my opinion, happens way too often.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think what I hear you
somebody
saying
a very dangerous tool.
Yeah. I think what I hear you saying is, the liability shift is one thing, but we don't want to do that without providing the education to the merchant and kind of that clear path forward to say, look, as we understand it, this is the way you should implement this program. But yeah, there's going to be other variables and we're not taking all of the variables into account, but we believe this is a compliant approach and we believe this is what you should do. Is that fair?
Yeah, and Patty, I hear you when you're saying don't give them too much, but give them a one pager that goes, look, here's generally, when you're playing football, you got this many players on your team, you're supposed to, score it in the other end over there. And as long as kick somebody, no kicking people in the head, that kind of thing, because look, am I going to disclose? Am I going to hand them the card rules and be like, you're responsible for this? No, you give them a link, but if you give somebody hey, this is how you do it. It's real simple, bullet points, and they can look at it and go, okay, I'm good. I think I get it.
Yep. Love it. Well, I think we could have this conversation for at least another hour, but since we don't have time for that today, we'll have to continue this at another time. So, James, I know a lot of people that are listening to this are saying, these are the issues they're thinking about right now. They're trying to figure out how to get a compliant program in place, how to, what does this rider look like, all of that. So for those that need legal advice and help in these areas and other areas related to the payments industry, how can they reach out and learn more about you and Global Legal Law Firm?
Absolutely. Yeah, we love working with agents. We understand that they're the ones pushing this industry forward. And, that's how our law firm was founded. So you can check out our website is globalllegallawfirm.com. You can email me, jhuber@attorneygl.com. And, we're on the internet.
Awesome. Love it. James, thank you so much. Always such a pleasure speaking with you, and I really appreciate you taking time to share your insights today.
James.
All right. Thanks, James and Patty.
All right. We're out.
Okay.
Great.
Good stuff.
Good stuff.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, man. Have a great day.
All right.
Sure, we'll talk soon.
I'll leave you guys to it.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, James.
See ya.
So, Patty, thought I would try something a little different today when we talk about Valor Paytech. Let's share our screen. So
I love your screen share here, James.
Yeah.
I actually saw this mobile dongle. I think it's a really cool thing.
Isn't that pretty cool? I think what's interesting about this, some people would almost look at it as a step backwards in technology from like, well, you use your smartphone. But the truth of the matter is, anybody that's ever actually used one of these dongles, this is nicer. And I'll tell you why.
Far
because
nicer.
People need to use their phone. And
Right.
so I think that what merchants loved about the dongle is this idea that, I can take my phone anywhere with me and it's small, it fits in my pocket and I can plug this thing in.
Mhm.
But I think what people hate about it is that it's their phone and they need their phone. And secondly, the dongles, frankly, are kind of hard to deal with. You know, plugging them in, and they're kind of error prone, and they tend to mess up over time. I even had one time that kind of messed up the headphone jack on my phone and stuff.
I saw a woman one time in a bakery with one of those dongles, and I asked her, how often do you have to replace it? She said, like every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
All the
exactly.
flour getting in there and
Yes.
gunking up the system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just not something you want on your phone. This
No.
device, and for those of you that are listening to the podcast, it actually looks exactly like a calculator is what it
Yeah,
looks
it
like.
does.
And it's a similar size, actually, a little bit bigger because it's got the top part, the kind of the swiper there.
Right.
But this is a device that supports, payments. It's lightweight, Bluetooth communication, PCI certified. It's really a cool little device. And this is when we say omni-channel, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You give that merchant their VL110 or whatever, their terminal, but then they're also going to need something they can use that's really mobile, that's mobile friendly. They can take to a little trade show or just have with them to take a payment at a
farmer's
catering or
market
whatever.
or
Yeah.
Food delivery, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Give this to your drivers. And so this is a device, they call it their Rocket, RCKT. So the mobile dongle is called the Rocket. So check out Valor Paytech, the Rocket. I think it's a really cool thing. Head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, and check out their suite of products. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So, Patty, today on Questions from the Field, I want to talk about selling through the summer. And I
good one.
Yeah, I actually have a episode of the Merchant Sales Insight that's coming out here in a few weeks. And I just wanted to talk about it real briefly here. But, as we're coming into the summer, everybody's making their summer plans. And I just thought it would be nice to take a minute to talk about kind of how I handle my summer and how I've always handled it as a merchant services professional, because I think it's very unique. So number one, our industry, as a general rule for ISO owners and agents, provides an unusually large amount of flexibility and this recurring income. So you can take time off, you still get paid. It's great.
Right.
And I think it's very easy to take that a little too far. And next thing you know, you're just kind of taking the summer off. And if that's your definition of success, good for you. Wouldn't begrudge that to anybody.
Nope.
I celebrate that, and I celebrate the flexibility. Patty, for me personally, every year I take my entire family, my wife's entire family, 2 different weeks, rent 2 different beach houses somewhere in the country, and we fly everybody and we go to a big beach house somewhere. It's a ton of fun, and I totally unplug.
Family. Yep.
Right. And then I'll usually even take another week and do something with just my wife and my kids, and we'll, so I take usually 2 to 3 weeks in the summer, totally unplug, have a blast. And I think everybody, if you've got the income and the position in life to be able to do that, I think you should do that. That's fantastic.
Right.
However, I like to think of the summer as a time of extreme focus. And what I mean by that is, yes, I have times where I am extremely focused on my family, right? But then I usually also have time when I'm extremely focused on my work. Right. In fact, during the summer, I know you've heard me talk about this before. I have a concept. I've never heard anybody else call it this before, so maybe it's my term. I don't know. I'll say it's my term. But I do a reverse vacation. So a vacation is where all you do is spend time with your family and you don't work. A reverse vacation is where all you do is work and you don't spend very much time with your family. And I celebrate that just as much as I celebrate my other vacations because my family is important and my work is important. And I have a lot of things I want to accomplish. And the truth is I wouldn't be able to do the things I'm able to do with my family if I didn't have the focus I have on my business. Right. And so here's what I want to challenge, those of you that are listening, thinking about your summer, think about it in terms of extremes and maybe explore that thought process with your spouse or significant other. And, what would that look like, right? What would it look like to just be extremely unplugged? And again, I don't want to discourage that. I want to encourage that. And so, think about that, pay the price to do that. One of the reasons why I have always had team members, even when it was like, oh my, I'm only making, $100,000 a year. And here I'm going to go ahead and hire somebody and pay them $25,000, $30,000 a year. It's like, well, my goodness, that seems crazy. I'm like, it's 30% of my revenue. Right. Why would I do that? Well, the reason I would do that is because I would rather enjoy my $70,000 a year than not enjoy my $100,000 a year.
Yeah. I get you.
So having a good person that's, maybe a part-timer or whatever, but having somebody in there who, when I go on vacation, they are able to make sure that everything is going okay. And they're at the very least, they're going to be a filter, so
Right.
they're going to deal with the minor issues. They're going to be able to make a judgment call of, can I delay this till James gets back?
Or can I take care of it?
Yeah, maybe they can take care of it. And again, if they can't, maybe they know how to reach out to the processor and say, hey, can you help me with this? James is on vacation. Right. So having that person, and then of course developing them over time to where they become a true partner and that they can help you grow the business. That's one of the main reasons I've always done that. Now, let me put a little caveat on that. Okay. And we were just talking about this right before the podcast. When you hire people, you have to train them and delegate to them. And this is something that is extremely time consuming.
Right.
And that's a commitment that you have to make. And,
Right.
and don't think it's going to take a day. It's going to take months to get people to a position where they're ready to really take responsibility for things. But, that's crucial to your business. There's no way around it. That's the only way to do it.
But don't you think that that's a big reason why a lot of people don't do it, is because of the time and expense
Absolutely.
of training somebody?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. In my experience, Patty, in our industry at least, the reason they don't do it is the expense. Then when they finally do spring for the expense, they immediately regret it because of the time investment, and their
Right.
expectations were misaligned with reality.
Right.
And they're like,
right.
I thought I was paying all this money to solve my problems. And it's like, well, yes, you are, but you have to pay all the money and invest all the time for 2 or 3 months. Then it solves your problems.
Right.
And so that's an important caveat, but focus on that. But then again, put time into selling. And let me give you 3 very quick bullet points of why I think you should remain engaged during the summer, this particular summer. Okay. Are you ready? Here they come. And again, we got a whole merchant sales inside on this coming up. Number 1 on my list right now is dual pricing, cash discounting, surcharging, this whole saga. It is changing rapidly. There's information I have right now that I wanted to share today, but I decided not to because I need to vet it out a little bit more. But things are changing. I promise you over the next 60 days, things are going to be changing even more. And this is a unique opportunity for you to go out and pitch an alternative to people that have maybe a non-cash adjustment program, and you're going to offer an alternative, a dual price or something to gain market share this summer. By the time you get back from your summer off, probably most of your competitors will already have made adjustments to comply with the new reality. And you just lost your opportunity there. Plus they might be coming after your accounts as you take your summer off,
Right.
And so I think dual pricing, cash discounting, that whole thing. I think integrated payments.
Yes.
How much longer do you have with these merchants? I was just at a merchant location. I posted on LinkedIn about
I
it.
saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. They've got Toast in there, and then they've got a
And they're
standalone
toast.
terminal. And they've got the standalone terminal there. I mean,
Right. It's
whoever sold them that standalone terminal, I'm sorry, but they're an idiot. Hello. I mean, that merchant is one phone call away from leaving you, and that merchant's on cash discount, huge pizza. I mean, I guarantee you, whoever sold that deal, they are making at least a couple thousand a month in residual on that account.
just on that account.
Just on that one account. And I guarantee you, they're one phone call away. Toast just has to pick the phone up and say, hey, did you know that we have this same feature? It just works a little bit differently, and they're done. So what do they need to do this summer? They need to go to that merchant and they need to say, hey, let me show you our point of sale options where the payments are integrated and we offer this dual pricing. That's an opportunity. Integrated payments. So again, dual pricing, cash discounting, surcharging, that whole saga is going to change over the next 90 days. Integrated payments is taken off like a rocket ship. I mean, not a week goes by that I don't have a software company reaching out to me for consulting because they want to do their own payment processing and all of this. I mean, this is happening, this is happening in real time, and you got to grab your piece of the pie before it's too late. And then finally, number 3, B2B payments. A couple of years ago, it was almost like, what's that? A year ago, it was like, oh, that's an interesting opportunity. One of these days I should take advantage of that. Now it's like, wow, most of the big companies are already getting into it. And it's still at this point where maybe for the next 3 months, it's not going to be crazy competitive. And then that's it.
It's maybe 6 months.
Maybe 6 months.
What was really interesting,
crazy.
James, is I was at the NEAA show and our friend Roger McNamara was there.
Yeah. Now from Visa.
Now, and I thought, I think that's really interesting. Roger was out there, rah B2B, and Visa tapped him because he's such an expert on B2B.
I just talked to Roger. I got a meeting with him in about a week, and so I've stayed in touch. And this is happening. And again, what's the difference in my mind is the people in our industry that are the movers and shakers that know how to sell stuff and know how to get distribution. They now have their attention on B2B.
Yeah.
And so, that means they're going to be reaching these merchants.
Yeah.
And so this is your opportunity. Align with a partner that knows what they're doing as far as B2B. Make sure you have the right technology solution, and then you got to go after it. And so those are three things I would consider. Maybe not all three, but I would consider
One of those.
at least one, and think about how could you put that into your summer and have your focus there. And then, of course, also having your focus on the other things that matter in your life. So there you go. There's my tips on selling through the summer.
Thanks a lot, James. That was great.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
James, I'm old enough to remember a comic strip called Dick Tracy.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Okay, now, Dick Tracy, my mother used to love reading this. I was never a big funnies person, but, I'd watch her. And I was kind of intrigued by Dick Tracy because he was a private eye. And what I remember most was that he had this wristwatch that was like a two-way radio where he communicated with headquarters or whatever.
Yes.
It was pretty futuristic for the 1950s and 60s.
It's now what my 10-year-old and 11-year-old have on their wrist.
And that's, exactly. They cracks me up when I see
Yeah, right.
I remember when you bought your kids those for Christmas.
Yes. Yes.
So, clearly, watching Dick, those cartoons sort of laid that framework for me that, the framework of believability, or, eye watches and seeing them in action, I remember the first time I saw somebody take their watch and hit it onto a contactless, onto one of those contactless terminals to do a payment.
Yep.
I was like, wow, Dick Tracy should be here to see that,
Yep.
Especially among, tech savvy millennials like yourself, James,
Yep. Oh, I'm using I used my Apple Watch to make a payment yesterday. So
doesn't surprise me.
Yep.
It wouldn't surprise me in the least. So, of course, then that begs the question, what's next? And MasterCard, I just learned this week, is betting on biometric payments, specifically face and hand scans. Scanning your face and waving your hand, they take a picture of your face or you wave your hand in front of a terminal. Kind of like, not a whole lot on I don't know if you fly a lot, but they have the Clear thing where
I have Clear.
Yeah, I use Clear. I love it. It gets me to the head of the line every time.
Yeah, I've got that Clear and the TSA pre-check.
You have the TSA pre-check, yeah.
I'll never forget the first time I was at that Orlando airport, which is always so crowded.
Oh gosh, yes.
And I always ended up having to wait in the line, and I finally had Clear and TSA, and so I went down there and I said, "Hey, where do I go? I have both." And they said, "Oh, we have a special line.
I know.
We have both." And I was like, "Oh, this is
Isn't that great? Especially in Orlando when you see those lines just coming out.
In like 7 minutes. I was like, "What?"
I had a very
cost me like
similar
$100 or
experience.
something. I was like, "This is
It's like
fantastic."
the best money I ever spent, right?
Exactly. Anyway, so that was
So anyway,
another
to get back
rabbit
to what I was MasterCard, they announced this week a first of its kind technology framework for merchants, banks, and technology providers to support consumer payments using face and hand scans in lieu of cards or mobile devices. Mobile devices loaded with payment apps, obviously.
Right.
They're calling it biometric checkout, and it provides a set of standards that support data security and consumer privacy. And my computer is just glommed up here, so I'm looking at my notes. Here we go.
All right. Yeah.
Had a moment there. So anyway, they say it's the next step to support the evolution of payments.
Sure.
Last year, I'm sure you'll recall, MasterCard released a mobile app that allows merchants to use their smartphones as contactless payment devices.
Right.
This sort of goes in that direction. MasterCard reports that roughly half of the MasterCard in-person switch transactions were contactless in the final quarter of 2021. By 2026, so half of all in-person switch transactions globally, this is, of course. You got to remember this. I know.
Wow.
But according to them, it's really going great guns in like third world. Asia, India, South America.
I can't imagine the US is even 25%.
No, I can't even imagine we're anywhere near that. But
Yeah.
they did find, however, that about 75% of consumers globally do have positive attitudes toward biometric technologies.
Right.
And that's not really a surprise, like you and I were just talking about things like Clear and, the concert venues are doing things like that. And also not surprising, these positive attitudes are far more widely held in emerging economies, about 90% there. So MasterCard has decided that it's going to, in fact, it this week started a pilot. It has about a half dozen technology partners in this endeavor. One of them is a company called Payface. As you might expect, they do facial recognition. It's a Brazilian firm, and they're going to be using biometric checkout with a large Brazilian supermarket chain. So, as a consumer, you go into you download an app, a Payface app. You enroll your face and your card information, and then at checkout they just smile. Camera takes a picture, says it's good to go. I think it's really cool, but I also, like you, I don't think we're going to see it here in the US anytime soon. But then again, I was thinking about this because in addition to Brazil, MasterCard said it plans to pilot this in the Middle East and Asia.
Yeah.
And they didn't mention anything about the US. But then I got to thinking, James, about 3 years ago, I had a press release come through here. I probably reported it here on the podcast about MasterCard testing out this technology that allowed people to use their smartphones as a contactless payment acceptance device.
Yeah.
And now I know NMI, for example, is offering something like that. And I'm sure they're not the only ones out there, but
yeah,
it's being offered here in the US. So it's just going to be interesting. In the
definitely.
old days, I used to say, oh yeah, maybe 10 or 20 years it'll come here. But with the speed of change in
now it's
the
like 10 to
markets,
20 months,
exactly.
That makes me think of, Patty, is actually chargeback situation.
Yes.
I think there are situations, let me give you an example. I could totally see a company like MasterCard making facial recognition an option to get level 4, almost like, level
Right.
2, level 3,
Right.
almost like a whole other
new
thing,
level. Yeah.
right? Or even a reduced level 2 or, level 2 with facial recognition or something. And I could definitely see things like that where it's like, look, we got your face. We have the face of the person. Like, this is biometric, so I
Right.
think there are, I wouldn't see this as being mass market for a long time,
No.
but I definitely
But
see surgical strikes.
I agree. But you tell that story. I have to tell you a quick little anecdote.
Yeah.
There's a series, I think it's on Netflix or Amazon, one or the other, called Hacks. It's
Okay.
about this comedian. Okay. And she has this writer who's a young 20 something.
Okay.
And she needs to get into her boss's phone.
Okay.
Okay. But the boss is out cold. She's just had surgery or, plastic surgery or something. So she
Right.
can't do it. So this woman is like, the boss is a very famous comedian. The premise is that she's a famous
Right.
Las Vegas comedian.
Okay.
So the assistant runs to to one of the hotels, right? Where
Yeah.
they have these bigger than life replicas of stars,
wax figure. Or
wax
something.
figures of some sort. To get into the phone, she holds it up to the woman's wax figure.
Oh my! Yeah, I guess that's true. Celebrities probably won't be signing up for
Right?
this.
That's when you were talking
That's
about that.
funny.
That's all I could think of. Is anybody with a wax figure, you better not sign up for one of these things.
I mean, but it's interesting you say it. I mean, it's a joke, which it is, but I mean, it also is interesting. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of thought that went into that because that's a pretty serious fraud issue. Are people able to in any way take a picture and in some way recreate some kind of 3D image that can be utilized? Or so I'm sure there is a.
I'm sure there is something,
this.
but it's not unlike the fingerprints. How people
Right.
will,
Yep.
I've heard stories of wives taking her husband's fingerprint to open her phone to check for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
Right?
you never know. That's crazy. Yeah. So
Yeah,
well,
it's pretty
this would be an
tough, but-
interesting trend. I think that's I definitely see some really interesting uses of that, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with all the
Yeah.
fintechs, and especially. So,
Yeah.
good stuff, Patty.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.